Hi, and welcome to Ignite's webcast, Modernizing Your Oversight Service Platform, sponsored by Delta Data. My name is Peter Carnavas. We'll get started in just a moment, but first allow me to explain the player on your screen. On the bottom, you'll see our audio controls. The sliding bar allows you to adjust the volume, and the circular double arrows can be used to refresh your media player. Beside the audio controls, there's a text box you can use to submit questions to our panel. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation, and please note all questions will be addressed anonymously. On top of the video window, you'll see a series of tabs containing more information about today's speakers. Now allow me to introduce our moderator, Elizabeth Ferdy. Elizabeth is a financial journalist with many years' experience covering the industry and will be leading today's discussion. Elizabeth?
Thanks very much, Pete, and good afternoon, everybody. As Pete says, my name is Elizabeth Ferdy, and I'm a contributor to Ignite, and I'm delighted to be here today to discuss a really important part of our industry and our processes. Oversight, it is a vital part of everything we do, but it can be a slow and inefficient part of what we do, especially for those of us still using manual processes. However, asset managers that prioritize modernization of their existing data infrastructure can benefit from reduced costs and reduced regulatory risk. This can all be done. It seems that the world is modernizing right before our eyes, and within the fund management and asset management industry, we need to keep up. Our panelists will discuss how asset managers can develop a modern centralized system by using new data solutions to help with risk management, operational cost, and reporting. We're also going to look at some common data challenges and the process of maintaining different data sources under an integrated tech platform. If this sounds like your kind of thing, you're in for a treat, because we have three fantastic panelists. They will be on screen if you can't already see them in a moment. But we have Colt Younger, who is the Senior Vice President of Product at Delta Data, our sponsors for the day. Murali Sridhar, who is the Managing Director for Financial Services and Capital Markets at KPMG. We also have John Murray, who is Director for Intermediary and Oversight and Transfer Agency Administration. I hope you don't have to write that out very often, John, at Charles Schwab. So welcome, everybody. Really great to have you here. The first question that I'm going to throw to you guys, quite simply, is what does intermediary oversight entail? John, I'm going to come to you for that first. If you can just give us a kind of top of the shop, what's it all about?
Sure, thanks, Elizabeth. So part of my function is oversight of intermediaries. So there's a lot that goes into it, but ultimately I'm going to walk through the primary processes and then relate them to the data elements, because I think it's important. There are different data elements than other parts of the organization may use. So, looking at the life cycle of the intermediary, ultimately on the front end, you have onboarding of the intermediary. We send out a questionnaire, gathering pertinent data elements to understand the relationship on the front end. Then we go to contract administration or execution, and we're looking at very specific data elements, service elements of the contract before we execute. Once the relationship's established, then we have ongoing due diligence. So we perform annual, frequent due diligence reviews, sometimes annually, sometimes more frequently. And as an intermediary on our platform, there's other oversight functions like 22C2, which is frequent trading deterrence monitoring. And again, we're relying in many cases for omnibus relationships on transparency from the intermediaries. And so, again, different data elements there. Lastly, and probably most importantly for us, is pulling together all of the data for our board reporting. So we have quarterly reporting to the board, and then more extensive reporting through our annual 15C review process.
So there's quite a bit to do, it sounds like, John. And for those of you in the audience, in audience lounge, please do submit questions as often and as frequently as you like. We will get to questions all the way through the webinar. We won't just wait till the end, so please don't you wait till the end, and the panel will get to the questions as soon as we can. You can also click on the bios of our panel through the tabs at the top or the bottom of the screen, however your screen is set up. Colt, do you want to chime in on what intermediary oversight entails? Because it sounds like there's a huge amount, which isn't just kind of sticking something on a platform and off we go to the races.
Yeah, it's interesting that John lays that out. I think, when we see customers on board with us, there's always a question of, what's involved in the program and not. And there's, sometimes concern that maybe their programs are not the same as others, and, they're wanting to compare and wanting sort of best practices. But with the components that John laid out are what we most commonly see, along with fee remediation in there. So he laid out a very good track of what we see from our clients as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So what are the current challenges for asset managers? We know that being an asset manager, you have so many opportunities and so many challenges. Murali, could you help us kind of identify the current challenges? Let's look at efficiencies, first of all, because we know that margins are being squeezed in some cases. So what are people coming to you and asking you about?
Yeah, so if you look at the history over the last decade, right, the whole intermediary management and oversight systems has kind of grown organically as a legacy patchwork of systems, right? There's the CRM system that you onboard intermediaries on. There's your master data system, your transaction and positions processing, fee and invoice payment. So these all, they're all different systems, and typically they don't talk very well with each other. So what you end up with is the same intermediary persona being tagged as different people, not having a clear view of what role they play in your system, in your ecosystem, right? So these are some challenges that our clients are facing for the last few years as the environment has grown more complex and there are more people in the ecosystem that you have to partner with, right? So in terms of efficiencies, there is a big push to enable straight-through processing. That's one of the key things that we see, right? Minimum touch. In terms of onboarding, there's a lot of focus on digitizing the onboarding process, so there's less friction for the intermediary as they get onboarded to the platform. And also after, as you go through the life cycle, automation of invoicing and calculation of fee and revenue sharing allocations, sending out the invoices, processing them, all of that are areas that are ripe for automation and efficiencies.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like there's a huge amount that could go wrong if it's not done properly, and it kind of fills my heart with dread to think this is all still done on paper by some people, but maybe. John, what do you perceive as being the main challenges or the most prominent challenges?
Yeah, I would agree with Murali. To the extent a company is utilizing multiple systems, obviously your data is living in disparate sources. And so ultimately, if you can get it all in one source, and I'll use the fee payments as an example. So your fee schedules from the contracts have to align with the invoices that you're receiving. And so if you have the contracts and the fee schedules and everything in one place, then you can reconcile your fees appropriately. The other thing is tying assets to the fees, getting data from intermediaries for a per position fee, as an example. There's certain data elements that you're missing, and so reliance on the intermediaries to get that data is very important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I was going to say, we see in that space exactly this, where the parties that are approaching us have all these disparate systems, and they're really trying to figure out a way to get this together and consolidate it so that they can really start to bring that up in reporting and other things. And when you have that spread across multiple platforms and so forth, it really makes it a challenge.
Yeah, and I would piggyback on the tail end of that, again, from a reporting perspective. Once you have everything in one place, building out the reporting capabilities can be challenging. And so, whether it's internal management reporting or reporting to the board.
Mm-hmm. We've had a question in from someone in the audience, so thank you very much for that. And I suppose this kind of gets to the heart of the matter. Excuse me. How manual does a process have to get for you to look into automation, efficiencies, or even transforming the process? We spoke when we had the prep call for this about fax machines still being pretty much everywhere, spreadsheets and post-it notes. How manual does a process have to be, and what's the most manual you've seen that can be transformed? Murali, Colt, I don't mind whoever.
Sure, I can take it. So clients are looking for a differentiated experience, right? So if you're not offering that frictionless onboarding, the experience when they call into your service line or contact center, if everything is manual and the people that you have in your organization are spending 70, 80% of their time trying to fix things manually because there is no automated pipeline or automated system that manages this, you're paying for it in terms of these kind of lost opportunity costs. So it makes sense to look at whatever is touching the client, or I would say more kind of front office focused, right? So if it is dealing with the client interaction, make sure it is seamless and automated. There are obviously other back office manual processes that you can look at in terms of reducing the operational costs and increasing the efficiencies, right? So, primary goal would be to make sure that your client experience is great.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, go ahead, John.
I'd add on there, you have an element of risk too, right? If to the extent you're doing everything manually, it increases your risk. Furthermore, I think most organizations are resource constrained, and ultimately you have to constantly be looking for efficiency and automation opportunities. And if you're not, then you're throwing more bodies at it, which isn't a good approach.
You made my points exactly where I was going to say, when you start to look at these processes and figure out when and why you're being pressured for resource, to free up resources. And if that's the case, you really have to start looking at what's not working well and really look to get into those moments. And then also, as John mentioned, where you're having problems, where is risk being introduced, where is it creating headaches for you? That's those ones you really want to focus on, the high energy and the high risk ones.
Mm-hmm. Also, before we get to what can actually be automated today, is there also if you've got a bunch of people who are checking this stuff and you're paying the people to do it, you could be paying them to do something a bit more useful, to do more analysis, or they could be better used. If you can find a machine to do it, as we're finding in all walks of life, is your staff, your payroll not better served for them doing something a bit more useful? John, you're nodding away.
Yeah, I would say to the extent you can introduce automation, you are allowing your human resources to do more important things. And I'll give an example. In our organization, we pull information from certain intermediary portals. To the extent they can push it to us, that's great. But we've built robotics to ultimately, in certain situations, log into the portal and pull the information into our system. So definitely, if you can take away the manual, labor-intensive steps that aren't really value add, that's where you need to leverage those.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also about talent retention and maturing your organizational talent, right? So obviously you don't want people to be doing repetitive work as much as possible. Obviously growing within the organization and working on more value-added tasks is always helpful as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially I think we've certainly in the UK there's a war on talent. I think it's pretty universal. So it's a good opportunity to get people doing more interesting stuff. So let's come to why modernize. I think we've kind of covered that off. We've done a lot of discussion on that. But what can be automated today? So what processes, and then we're going to come to data. What can be automated? What can be done? Colt, tell me what can be done already today as we sit here. What can you press a button and do?
Well, you can certainly remediate your fee invoices, and what I mean by that is sort of in a click of a button, you can recalculate all the data. You can marry it with your TA and sub-TA data to give confidence in those payments that you're going to make. And once that's mapped and in place, you can do that in a matter of seconds. And so what used to take people, a considerable amount of time with spreadsheets and pivot tables, you now have at your fingertips in seconds, and you can take that all the way to approval. You can go all the way from automating the load of the invoice to the actual part that I talked about here, remediating, all the way to a final approval if it passes your thresholds. And that can be automated end to end if that's what you really choose to do, and certainly anywhere in between that. And that's just one example of where you can really take advantage of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other thing is around reporting. The biggest thing is being able to automate the reporting. John spoke about that, but if you think about all these data sets, you've got the fee data, the 22C data, you may be looking at position or trade data as well. Having that centralized and be able to have analytics over the top of that at your fingertips always just changes the game. So if you're reporting to the board or you're working in your operational reporting, just having it there at your fingertips all the time really changes a lot of situations. Whereas a lot of teams are very reactive. Someone shows up and says, "I need this data." Well, you already have it. It's right there in front of you, like it's already set in place, and that really helps out a tremendous amount.
Mm-hmm. And what about security of data? Because we read often about people leaving folders on trains, or people losing files in washing machines, or whatever it might be. What about security of data? What's available now? What can you do, and how does automation help with the security aspect?
I'm not sure I know about how it helps on the automation side, but the security landscape has vastly improved, especially we moved to the cloud and other technologies. It's just vastly changed the landscape of what we can monitor, how we can control the data, and things like that. It's those days of the file being on your desk and stuff. It just doesn't exist anymore like that. And if it does, that's the danger to you. So having it cloud based, having all the security that the world offers out there on that just changes the landscape completely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you can have a security strategy that spans your entire stack, right, all the way from the application level down to the data level. And even within the data, you can enable things like fine-grained access control or role-based access and privileges to ensure that only the people who need to have access to that data do have access to the data, and having some monitoring and checks and validation to make sure, periodically that as people come and go within the organization, your access controls are up to date, and having that accountability as well is really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have lots of customers that do just that very thing. They ask for reporting about access to the system. With periodic, once a month they want to know who's in and out of the system, who has access, and that really, the technology really helps enable that. We can really monitor and pay attention to everything.
Mm-hmm. And how does this kind of come through to client service? So what you're giving the end investor or whichever stakeholder we're talking about, just by having automated systems, how does it improve what we do every day? It's better for the people within the business, but for the client, how does it improve what you guys do for them? John, how does it improve your client service proposal?
Yeah, I would say from a client experience perspective, having accurate and timely data available within tools that can easily be utilized by the end client is important, and that should always be a focal point of an organization, so that they have easy access at their fingertips to information, and it's easily obtainable and easy to navigate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. So if we look at what benefits there are, and obviously this doesn't come for free. Colt, I'd love to think that you're traveling around the world just handing out free packages, but it's not just yet. But there is initial outlay. But how does it help with cost? How does automation translate into cost efficiencies and cost savings and stopping? How does cost come into it?
Yeah, it is. It's honestly very straightforward. These efficiencies that you create really free up your staff for more valuable work, or in some cases free you up to not need that same number of FTEs. No one wants to have that discussion, but the reality is the automation and things of that nature, they really do take down the resource demand as it relates to human capital, and that is a big factor of cost in all these organizations. And so when you look at automating reporting, things like that you can now get at a fingertip where someone might have spent a week or two assembling that before, it really changes the game in terms of the resources that you need to do it, whether you redeploy those somewhere else or you save it as an efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would comment in that, especially in the topic of oversight, most organizations are building or have already built data warehouses. The challenge is there's priorities of certain data elements that are more important, whether it's regulatory data, product data, often not intermediary oversight data, or what we would call client master, but that's the intermediary type information. And so in order to build that in organically, ultimately that's going to cost a lot of resources to do that. So buying an off-the-shelf solution that's focused on oversight is a much more viable and economical direction to go.
Mm-hmm. And Murli,
we also see there's an element of trust and adoption as well with all of these data systems. So where we see costs increasing is, you spent a year building your data warehouse, but if the business does not trust it, you're sending the data, but they're doing their own reconciliation, just trust but verify kind of a thing, right? So it's very important that the data that you're bringing in from the different source systems are appropriately certified and validated before sending them down to your consumer, so they don't have to recheck your calculations.
Mm-hmm. Which brings us nicely to a question that we've had in from the audience. Thank you for continuing to send in your questions. It's kind of getting a bit meta here. How do you approach the oversight of the automated processes? So the oversight of the oversight processes to ensure everything is working and catching what they should. So watching the watchers, I suppose. Is that right?
John, how do you watch the watches?
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you that, when things are automated, you're hoping things work properly. But ultimately, and I'll use asset reporting by intermediary as an example. We have historical reporting, and so we do checks against previous month's data to see if there's any anomalies there. Other types of various checks, but ultimately in our case, we do use a vendor, and it's working with them to ensure that they have the proper controls in place ultimately. And before rolling out any reporting, it's thoroughly tested in a UAT environment to ensure that what's intended to be reported is being reported.
Mm-hmm.
If I may, yeah. There is an element of exception-based reporting here. So you're monitoring all of your systems in some specific format, and instead of reacting to everything that comes up, there are ways of looking at specific exceptions, applying those. It could be rule-based, or more recently we've seen a lot of adoption around using machine learning techniques to detect those anomalies, to separate the signal from the noise, so to speak. So your business folks are really focused on the actual issues based on historical trends, as opposed to just reacting to everything that breaks a threshold. It may be an anomaly or an outlier based on a business, like a regular business event that you don't need to react to, right? So we are seeing adoption around machine learning techniques in this area as well.
Mm-hmm. Because it's not, if you bring in a solution or a system to do what you needed to do, you're not absolving yourself of any responsibility. It's not just like, oh, I got this thing, I've plugged it in, and I can just walk away. You
don't get that luxury. no client we have is going to accept that. Yeah, and these guys are making a good play here on machine learning, AI. Things like that are really enabling vendors like us to go back and check ourselves, to go back and learn these processes and bring out to us potential problems, and then sort of the continual back testing of the software and all that stuff to make sure that it's functioning as is. That way, as when we release stuff, we don't introduce new things to it. Those are really key in keeping this process in place and making sure that it's performing correctly.
Thank you. So this all sounds really good. We're going to turn to the obstacles. Because no one likes change. We know that. We're all of an age where things have changed and it's all very different now. So when we were young, but no one likes it. But we can see the potential and the opportunity with changing and upgrading systems and becoming more live and operationally efficient. What do you find the obstacles to be, Murli, when you speak to clients? Is it cost? Is it the data availability? What are the issues that, I would do this, but what are the buts that you're coming across? We would do this if only.
I think the first but I hear is around the current systems being so ingrained and the processes being so ingrained within the organization. The people who know this, they've, again, grown organically along with the systems. And in certain cases, only one or two people know how that works, right? So untangling that thread and, moving to a more modern platform on the cloud or software as a service platform is very hard, because you first need to really understand what these processes are doing, right, at the most granular level, and come up with a strategy on how you're going to move it to a more modern platform, right? So that's the first obstacle that I see. Obviously, cost being one, and there's some level of fatigue you see as well, right? You've moved 4 or 5 different systems, but you still have a lot more to do. And then, how much more do we need to get out of our old systems, and when are we actually going to see the results, right? So the way we advise our clients is start small, but kind of think big and look to the future and start getting immediate gains. So the business teams see the value, and that will drive more adoption, right? Nothing succeeds like success. So you continue to drive and build that, and don't do boil the ocean technique where you're spending 2 years implementing a platform and the requirements have changed, the teams have changed. You may not need it anymore, right? Or something new has come up which is better, right? So that's kind of being very iterative and product centric is what we advise clients.
John, does that chime with you? Can you think of any other obstacles that to be overcome?
Yeah, I was just thinking of industry solutions that have been presented in the past, and even current, that really need to be leveraged by both the intermediaries and the asset managers. And ultimately, in order to gain efficiencies across the industry, you need adoption. And so the challenge has historically been, okay, who's gonna adopt first, the asset manager or the intermediary? And so that's always challenging to get to a level where a good percentage of the industry is using a solution at hand. I would say internally, you really need buy-in from senior management to move forward with a solution that's different. You often hear, well, we've always done it that way, and that's a good example of what Murali had said, that ultimately you need to be willing to make the change, and it could be painful to do so, but in order to affect the change, you got to be able to make commitments.
Colt, what are the common ones that you hear when you go on your travels? Or we'd love to do this, Mr. Younger, but
yeah, it's often as Murali spoke, the ingrained process is already there today. It's going to be too hard to change that. It's too set in place, or it's a cost thing. Can I prove an ROI on this? What is your system cost versus what it's going to take to, how much am I going to have to trim out here? What efficiency can I get out of it? Because most people don't have the luxury of just having a budget and putting it in. They have to put it in with some savings, some ROI, something that they can sell to upper management. And so those are the most common things.
Mm-hmm. Where do you think regulation sits within all this? Do you think if there was suddenly a load of regulation coming through saying you need to, ensure that this does this or your client needs, do you think regulation will play a part in the modernization of the industry?
I think it does. It does today. And we have periods of time where it's heavier than others, and you see a lot more activity in those times. It's been a little bit quieter in this space in the last little bit, but yeah, that definitely is a driver. We definitely see the activity when that happens.
Mm-hmm. And John, is that something on your radar as well? You watching what's happening within regulatory circles?
Oh, absolutely. As we all know, the regulatory environment's crazier than it's ever been. And that's certainly going to impact, depending on final rules that come out, how we operate. And so, that's at the forefront for us at Schwab.
Mm-hmm. Murali, are you, I presume at KPMG, you're keenly aware of everything that's happening in the regulatory corridor of power?
Yeah, some of the big ones over the last year have been ESG focused, right? Which I think, at least in the US, have taken a bit of a backseat this year. But yes, I mean, what we see is, don't look at your problem as solving for a specific regulatory need. There is an increased request for transparency from the investors, from your advisors, just from all your stakeholders, right? So if you think of it like that, regulatory sometimes is mandatory, so you have to do it. But if you look across the entire ecosystem of all the stakeholders and partners, solve for those problems, and then you'll automatically solve for regulatory issues as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'm going to come to some questions now because they're pouring in. So people are really engaged. This is fantastic. I am going to ask one that I'm going to have to read from the board because it's quite technical. What are the key considerations for organizations when deciding between implementing internal platform automation or adapting external tools like robotic process automation to improve efficiency and streamline processes within their operations? Who would like to answer that?
I can take a stab at it. Yeah, so, sorry, can I?
Yes, please.
Do you want to? Okay. So there's no one size fits all. Typically, automation may involve, or a solution may involve multiple aspects of what you mentioned, right? It could be a robotic process automation, which sometimes tends to be very brittle. So you want to look at which parts of the life cycle something like RPA is good for. Whereas if you look at more data-centric platforms or applications, you might want to build pipelines that are automated. You could build that internally, or you can choose a platform, right, to do most of the work for you. And then we also see quite an inflow of business process management tools that automate the workflow. So instead of sending emails, waiting for a response, going through approvals over the phone or through email, all of that lifecycle can be automated using BPM type solutions, right? So, and then you can also hook in some of these RPA and pipelines into your BPM solution, so it becomes a holistic end-to-end automation solution for you, right? So that's kind of what we see happening. So again, you cannot say, hey, this is the best for a specific area, but typically we see a solution that's made up of multiple components.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you for your question. We're going to dive back into the prepared notes that you had now. Mm-hmm. What are the current modernization trends more generally? What are we seeing? Because it seems that the investment world moves quite slowly and then moves quite quickly all at once. What are we seeing? Colt, what are the areas of focus for you, and what are people asking you about? Not very specifically, but more broadly in terms of what's really causing the headaches at the moment that people really want to wrangle with?
Yeah, obviously it's automation around the data so that they can get to that reporting. It's automation of those, remediation of those fee payments that I talked about, where they're spending a lot of energy and time, and there's a lot of money involved in that. It's areas like that we see. We also have gotten a lot of interest as of recently in onboarding and the process flows around that, and having a very controlled approach in, as well as the document storage. I think John went through these in the beginning, but those are really the key spots that people are focused on. Like, how do they get this business on? How do they get the documents into place? And then how do they automate these processes where they can put that together?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would just chime in. I mean, it's really difficult in the intermediate oversight space to build something internally that essentially houses all the data elements that you need to have housed, and then the workflow and the fee remediation, everything that goes into it. So, off-the-shelf solutions like Delta Data certainly allow for an asset manager to be able to have everything live in one place without the manual work. And I've been in the industry a while, so I know what it's like on the manual side, and it's nice when you have everything in one place, because ultimately all your data's connected and it's working together and ensures quality reporting.
Which is the most difficult part of this to tackle? Because there's so much that needs addressing, but where are the most difficult parts? We've said about the data, we've said about making sure everyone's on board and getting the staffing, and partners to all agree. But what's the most difficult part of this, Murali? What when we're looking at this, and people say, we really want to get a handle on this. What's the most difficult part? And that could be anything from, getting the check signed to the pulling the systems apart.
I think I don't know if this is a difficult part, but having a clear strategy and vision typically is very difficult before you get started on a lot of these, fixes and implementations, right? So unless year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, what you really want to do and your transformation aligns with your business strategy, it's typically set up to fail. So you can implement the best system, but if it doesn't align with your strategy for next year, there's no point, right? So I would say that's kind of difficult to get started, really, is to have that vision and strategy moving forward and getting buy-in from, obviously your partner ecosystem and your internal and external stakeholders.
Yeah, I think confidence in your plan and confidence in your ability to execute can be a real challenge in the beginning. Feeling like you have the right path and that you can actually pull it off, in the time frame and the budget that you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. And what happens? I mean, do you get a sense? Do you get a sense that the market is really moving? It certainly feels like it is. But what happens? So first question, do you feel the market is moving? And secondly, what happens to the asset managers who just kind of put their head in the sand and say, I don't need to do this, I'm fine, our setup is fine, our oversight processes are absolutely fine, we can keep doing this. What happens to those guys? And obviously we're kind of preaching to the choir a little bit here. But what happens to the people who just decide not to bother, at least for the moment?
I would say that, if the asset managers are doing everything manually and not either building a solution or leveraging an off-the-shelf solution, they have to be overstaffed because there's no way you can handle this without some automation and centralization.
Mm-hmm. And Colt, how do you? This is obviously something that you would like everybody to do, but what happens in the future? Do these asset managers get left behind? How does the picture look in 10 years?
I think it's harder for them to comply with the next set of demands. As John mentioned, they're using a lot of staff. They end up having to have more staff, so you just can't get the efficiencies there. And then I think, if you don't automate and whatever, and you need all these new things, it's much harder to adapt to that and to change that because you don't really have the tools to do it. So you end up expending a lot more resources trying to do that.
Mm-hmm. And Murali, when you speak to clients, do you still get a reluctance to join this new approach, or is everyone on board?
No, we are seeing a lot of traction over the last decade in terms of automating a lot of these processes. So I would say, I think everybody's on board in terms of this being a necessity. Now, there are different levels of maturity. There are leaders in the game, right, who have gone through this a few years before, and most of the processes are automated. They are able to offer that differentiated experience to their clients. There are other managers who may not have that level of complexity. I mean, based on their asset classes that they manage, the number of intermediaries that they manage, right, it may not be necessary for them to go through that level of transformation. But again, there is a lot of value in terms of automating your manual processes, no doubt about that.
Mhm. We're going to come
You're
in.
You're not the first person to go through it, and other people have blazed the path, and so there's definitely a way to get there and a way to do it. And like you mentioned, there's not a one size fits all. So I think it's important to know that, and that you're not alone. Like in the case of our clients, you're getting the benefit of all of our clients, because what they bring to the table, what they teach us, what we put into the software, you get that benefit that they've created for you, and like vice versa. And that really matters. You're not sort of in your own little myopic world, solving it yourself. You can sort of see what other people have done and are doing, and really take advantage of great ideas that are in different shops. And it really creates a collaboration that whether you physically call them and talk to them or not, it's still happening because you're getting the benefit of the group think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would say that every asset manager is probably in a different life cycle, but even if you're fairly automated now, it's an endless pursuit of further automation. There's certainly probably more workflow tools that we can implement as an example. So you may be behind, or you may believe that you're up to speed, but again, in the future, you're going to have more opportunities.
You've answered my one of my final questions. Is there a blueprint? It doesn't seem like there is a blueprint, or if there was a blueprint, we've massively expanded and upgraded, and we add to the blueprint every time somebody follows it. But is there a wrong way to do this? I think we kind of touched on if you don't have a vision, but is there a wrong way? Is there a wrong starting point? Are there wrong expectations to start this process?
That's a great question. I don't know if I know. Go ahead, Jim.
I don't know if I have the great answer, but I think ultimately, if you start down a path and you truly don't know your data lineage, or the use of your data on the tail end, how you want to report it, then you're probably doing yourself a disservice. You really need to start with the end in mind when you're looking at a solution and how to build it out.
Mm. Great, thank you. I'm going to come to the audience questions now, because we have some quite specific ones. So again, thank you very much for putting these through to us. I'm going to throw this one to the floor. What are your thoughts towards using user control tools, self-created, non-IT supported, versus vendor tools? And does it change your oversight methodology?
So you're seeing more of the use of an in-house tool or your personal something like that. I think you miss out from the sort of what I mentioned a minute ago, sort of the collaborative nature that's gone into the software, like what we offer. You miss that because you're on your own sort of defined thing, and then depending on what level that's at, it's not easily shared or used by other people potentially. So there's some challenges with that. That's just the first things off the top of my head on that one.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, there are different flavors of user controls, right? We are seeing a significant trend towards, everybody's working with data and analytics. We are seeing a trend of all of the practitioners within the business knowing their data, knowing how to do the analysis. So whether it's Excel or some other visualization tool, they should be able to, look at the data and slice it and dice it in any way they want, right? To that extent, the user-defined analysis or controls is absolutely fine. In fact, it should be encouraged. Whereas if you go further upstream into your source systems, it's better to leave that to a more engineered, automated solution that's supported by your IT system or your IT teams, right? That way you have standard release schedules, you have change management, you have all of these controls built into it. So again, back to my point earlier, you need to trust the data that's coming out so you can actually do the analysis. So it really depends on where the user controls reside. I wouldn't recommend having non-IT supported systems work on your critical data.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thanks, Roland. Final question, because we're almost out of time, and everyone has to go back and get back to work. What strategies should be considered to ensure the security and privacy of sensitive data when implementing modernization efforts for the Oversight service platform? John, I might come to you. There's then we all get a final go.
Yeah, Elizabeth, I'd say whenever we're utilizing a third-party vendor, we have an extensive due diligence process on the front end, which includes IT security, BCP, vendor management, and extensive questionnaires, ongoing due diligence to ensure that our vendors are providing secure data, whether it's a SaaS solution or any other type of solution.
Yeah, and from our perspective, just use like a social security number or something like that. We obfuscate those from ourselves, from our own users, and from everyone else, so that we try to limit anywhere that data, really sensitive data, could be exposed, and that really cuts down on that issue. And we certainly work with clients if there's sensitive parts of their data. We may scrub that data so that it's more generic in the system, as long as we can make whatever it is that they want to work correctly, whether it's analytic or something like that. We may do that, but we may scrub the data so that nothing can be, extracted from that or used in a malicious way.
That's very reassuring. Thank you very much, folks. That's all we've got time for today. So thank you to my panel, Colt, Murali, and John. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you to the audience. Thank you for asking such brilliant questions. It's always really nice when people send questions in. Saves me a job. So don't forget, you will be able to access this webinar tomorrow. It will be sent through on an email, I believe, tomorrow morning. But thank you for being part of it. Thank you for being on the panel. We will hopefully see you at the next one.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Just echoing Liz's thanks to the panel, to Colt, Murali, and John for participating, to Elizabeth for moderating, and a very big thank you to Delta Data for sponsoring today's conversation. Please check your email for information regarding future webcasts, as well as access to the recorded archive for this one. Thanks all.